The desert heat pressed down like a curse. The horizon shimmered in waves, and each gust of wind carried with it the taste of dust and the faint hiss of rattlesnakes sliding over stone. A lone rider crested the ridge, his shadow stretching long and sharp across the sand. His name was Daniel Hayes, a man whose reputation lingered on the tongues of drifters and cardsharps like smoke after a fire. To some, he was a gunslinger, cold and merciless. To others, he was a broken man running from the echo of his own gunshots. Today he was neither. He was simply a wanderer searching for something quieter than guilt. The Apache camp lay in the hollow of the canyon, smoke rising from low fires, children's laughter cutting faintly through the stillness. Daniel's horse shifted uneasily as the scent of burning sage reached them. His hand, scarred and steady, brushed the animal's neck, calming it with practiced ease. He had come unarmed, or at least as unarmed as a man like him could ever truly be. The weight of the revolver he had left behind gnawed at his hip, a phantom itch, but he would not come here as a killer. Not this time. The tribe's chief, Tall Hawk, stood before the council fire, a figure carved from pride and time. His face bore the lines of battle survived, his eyes sharp as the desert stars. When he saw Daniel approach, silence fell over the gathering. They knew his kind, white men with fast hands and quicker tempers. But this one carried himself differently, shoulders heavy with something that wasn't swagger but sorrow. Tall Hawk measured him, suspicion flickering like a blade's edge. "You seek peace, cowboy?" the chief asked, his tone more accusation than question. "I seek a place where ghosts can't find me," Daniel replied. His voice was low, firm, and worn thin. He didn't beg, didn't boast. He simply stated what gnawed at him. The crowd murmured. Warriors shifted, their braids swaying, their weapons gleaming. To them, this man was both threat and curiosity. Tall Hawk studied him longer, then smiled, a sharp, humorless twist. "Peace has a price," the chief said. "Do you have the coin for it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I've paid enough in blood." The chief's laughter cut through the camp, and with a gesture, he summoned a figure from the shadows. A hush fell, heavier than before. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, her frame slight against the flickering firelight. Her name was Ayanna, though Daniel did not yet know it. A pale scar cut across her cheek, a mark of old violence. Her eyes, clouded with blindness, did not fix on anything but seemed to search, restless, as if grasping for a world that never held still. She limped as she walked, her gait uneven, and though she stood with her people, she seemed apart from them. Tall Hawk's voice rose, mocking and cruel. "Here is peace, cowboy. My daughter, blind, broken, worthless to us. Take her if you have the courage. Make her your burden." Laughter rippled through the warriors, sharp and stinging. They expected refusal, anger, maybe even blood. This was no offer. It was humiliation dressed as generosity. Daniel looked at her, really looked. Her chin was lifted though her eyes betrayed the truth of her affliction. Her hands, though trembling slightly, remained clenched at her sides in quiet defiance. She was not laughing, not sneering. She stood still against their cruelty, and in that stillness, Daniel saw something no insult could cover. He could have walked away. Pride would have demanded it. But pride was the currency that had ruined him before. He thought of the duel that still haunted his nights, the boy he had killed for nothing but a wager and a lie. He thought of the blood on his hands, the families broken because he was too proud to back down. And now, here was a chance to choose differently. The laughter died when Daniel spoke. "I'll take her." The words cut the night. Shock spread through the circle like wildfire. Tall Hawk's smile faltered, confusion flashing in his eyes before hardening into something colder. "You don't understand, cowboy," he said slowly. "She is no gift. She is shame." Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "Then your shame has a name now. Same as mine." Ayanna's breath caught, so faint it might have been mistaken for the stirring wind. The tribe fell silent. This was not the response they had expected, and silence in the desert was heavier than any roar. The chief's eyes narrowed. You would bind yourself to her mockery, to her broken body. Daniel's gaze never wavered. I've carried worse burdens. At least this one can walk beside me. No laughter followed. The fire snapped and cracked, the only sound in the weight of what had just been spoken. For the first time, Iona's head tilted slightly toward the man who had claimed her name, and though her clouded eyes could not see him, her lips pressed together in something that was not quite disbelief and not yet hope. Tall Hawk's hand tightened on his spear, but he did not strike. His insult had been stolen from him, transformed into something defiant. He could only turn his gaze away, for to look at his daughter now was to see a truth he had denied. Broken things could still carry pride. The night deepened, the fire burned low, and Daniel Hayes stood with Iona in the quiet aftermath. The camp would never see him as one of their own, but neither could they dismiss him as a fool. He had chosen his path, and it was bound now not by pride or violence, but by a name shared between two souls scorned by the world. And yet, as the desert wind shifted and coyotes cried in the distance, Daniel knew this was no ending. It was the beginning of something that would demand more from him than bullets or bravado ever had. Iona's hand brushed against his arm, tentative, searching. He did not move away. He let her find him there in the dark. The narrator's voice, quiet as the desert night, lingered like a warning. In a land where insults were sharper than knives and survival was bought with blood, Daniel Hayes had just turned a mockery into a vow. And vows in the West were tested by fire. The shack Daniel called home sat on the edge of a scrubland where the grass grew thin and the wind never seemed to rest. It leaned against the horizon like an old drunk, weather-beaten boards patched and scarred from storms that had tested it too many times. Into this place he brought Iona, the woman the world had labeled broken. She entered without hesitation, her careful steps tracing the uneven floor, her fingers brushing rough-hewn furniture as though memorizing the shape of her new life. Daniel stood in the doorway longer than he should have, wondering if he had invited her to a sanctuary or a prison. At first, silence ruled between them. Daniel was a man of few words, and she was a woman used to being ignored. The night stretched long, filled with the steady drip of leaking rain barrels and the lonely howl of coyotes. He lit the lamp, she sat near it, her cloudy eyes turned toward the warmth though not the flame. He watched her sometimes, quietly, and she must have felt it, for she would tilt her head, not in discomfort, but as if testing whether she could sense him by presence alone. The neighbors did not stay quiet. Whispers rode the wind as quick as dust devils. At the trading post, men nudged each other, muttering about the gunslinger who had shackled himself to a cripple. Women clucked their tongues, pitying her, condemning him. Daniel felt the weight of every stare, but Iona bore it differently. She listened without flinching, her lips set in that same thin line of defiance he had first seen by the fire. When one ranch hand sneered loud enough for her to hear, calling her dead weight, Daniel's hands clenched so tightly his knuckles cracked. But Iona laid a hand lightly on his arm, halting him. Their words belonged to them, she whispered. Not to us. Days turned into weeks. Daniel tried to keep her life as ordinary as possible, though nothing about it was simple. He guided her hand to ropes and taught her to tie knots strong enough to hold skittish calves. He led her to the corral, placing reins in her fingers, letting her trace the leather as he described each part of the horse. At first she trembled, uncertain, but slowly her confidence grew. He lifted her into the saddle, staying close enough that she could hear his voice and feel the steadiness of his touch. She laughed once when the horse shifted beneath her, and the sound startled him. It was light, unguarded, like a crack of sunlight through storm clouds. He realized then he had not heard true laughter in years, not from her, not from himself. But the world would not allow peace to settle. In town one evening, Daniel brought Iona to buy flour and lamp oil. The saloon was spilling over with drunks, the piano banging out a crooked tune. As they passed, a ranch hand stumbled into their path. His eyes, glassy with whiskey, latched onto Iona. "Well now," he slurred. "Ain't she the chief's cursed one? Man, you must be desperate." The words rang loud, meant to sting. Daniel's hand twitched toward his belt where no revolver rested, but his fists were enough. The first punch landed quick and sharp, breaking the man's nose before he could finish his laugh. The fight was brutal and fast, Daniel striking like a man who'd spent his life throwing death into the world. Each blow echoed with years of guilt, every swing reminding him of who he once was. When the man finally collapsed in a heap, gasping and bloodied, silence swept through the street. Daniel turned, chest heaving, and saw Iona standing straight, chin lifted, her hand steady on the basket she carried. She did not look ashamed. She looked unbroken. Back at the ranch, she did not scold him for the violence. Instead, she said softly, "You fight as if the world is still testing you." He said nothing. Words caught like stones in his throat. She touched his cheek, her hand feather-light, finding the cut where a stray blow had caught him. "But you are not being tested alone anymore." One night, the fire in the hearth burned low. Daniel sat sharpening an old knife, the rhythm steady, almost soothing. Iona's voice rose from the corner, soft and melodic, carrying an Apache song. It spoke of rivers that remembered every stone they touched, of winds that carried whispers across mountains. Though he could not understand every word, the melody wrapped around him, gentle as water. When she finished, she said, "My people sing so the land will not forget us. You have songs, Daniel." He shook his head, ashamed of the silence his culture had left him. "Then I will lend you mine," she said. Her presence grew larger in his life, not by filling space, but by changing the weight of it. He began to look forward to her laughter, to her quiet strength, to the way she steadied him with a single word. She was no longer a burden left at his door. She was a partner shaping the ground they walked upon together. But shadows lengthened. Tall Hawk came to the ranch one evening, his silhouette cutting against the fading sun. He watched his daughter carry water, her steps sure though her eyes never followed the bucket's sway. He saw Daniel steady her with a hand at her elbow, not out of pity but partnership. The chief's gaze darkened. "You think you've made her whole," Tall Hawk said. Daniel met his stare. "She was never broken." The chief's mouth twisted. "The desert does not forgive weakness. Remember that, Cowboy." He turned and left without another word, but his warning lingered like the taste of ash. Later that night, Iona sat on the porch, her hair unbound, the wind playing through it like fingers through reeds. "My father gave me away to wound you," she said quietly. "And yet here I am, alive. Why?" Daniel leaned against the post, watching her profile against the starlit sky. "Because I don't see what he sees. I see a woman stronger than anyone I've known." Her lips parted, trembling, and for the first time she let her guard slip. "And if I am not enough?" He stepped closer, his voice low, steady as the earth. "You're not broken. You're mine." The words settled between them, heavier than vows spoken in churches, deeper than promises etched in paper. Her hand found his, fingers curling, hesitant yet certain. The night wrapped them in silence, but it was not the silence of strangers anymore. It was the quiet of two souls finding the rhythm of survival together. Beyond the porch, coyotes sang, the desert alive with its harsh chorus. Daniel knew the peace would not last. The land had ways of testing every oath spoken beneath its stars. Yet as Iona's hand rested against his, he felt the faintest ember of something he had thought long dead, a reason worth fighting for. The summer sun burned harder that year, flattening the land into a canvas of dust and thirst. Ranchers muttered about water drying too fast, about herds thinning, but Daniel sensed another kind of danger brewing. Whispers of a gang rode the wind, men with nothing to lose, carving fear across settlements, shaking down ranchers for land and blood. He ignored the gossip at first, burying himself in work, but one evening in town, as he and Iona traded for seed, the whispers took shape. The gang was real, and its leader was a name Daniel recognized from another life. Clint Mercer. Once a boy with a reckless grin, now a wolf with a pack at his back. Years ago, Daniel had seen him in the shadows of saloons, hungry for violence, desperate for a reputation. He hadn't expected him to survive long enough to grow dangerous, yet here he was, claiming the land as if it were his birthright. When Mercer's men first appeared on the Hayes Ranch, they didn't come shooting. They came laughing. 4 of them mounted and easy, circling like vultures. Their leader wasn't among them, but the message carried his stink. "Nice little homestead," one drawled, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Shame if it burned." Daniel stood silent at the fence line, arms crossed, while Iona remained inside. The men sneered when they saw her shadow through the window. "Didn't think you'd settle for scraps, Hayes. She can't even see you swingin' that hammer." The words were meant to cut, but Daniel's face never shifted. He waited until they rode off, dust trailing behind like smoke, and then he walked inside. Iona had heard everything. She sat at the table, her hands clenched white against the wood. "They'll come back," she said quietly. He nodded. "Then we'll be ready." 2 nights later the gang returned, and this time they didn't bother with warnings. Fire caught the barn roof before Daniel even heard their horses. Flames clawed the sky, cattle screaming as the blaze swallowed the night. Daniel grabbed his rifle, shoved it into Iona's hands. "Load for me." Her fingers shook but obeyed, sliding cartridges into the chamber with surprising steadiness. He kicked the door open, the dry air filled with smoke and gunpowder, and the shooting began. Gunfire shattered the dark in brutal rhythm. Daniel moved fast, crouching low, returning fire with the precision of a man who had once lived by the draw. His bullets struck true. One rider fell, another spun from the saddle. But more poured in, shadows flickering against the firelight. Short, sharp sentences filled the night. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Smoke choked. Horses screamed. Iona, coughing but unyielding, kept feeding him ammunition, her hands blistering from the heat of the metal. At one point a bullet tore through the doorframe inches from her head. Daniel shoved her down, rage surging like wildfire. "Stay low," he barked, his voice jagged. But she refused to cower, dragging another box of cartridges to his side. Her blindness did not matter in that moment. She was not helpless. She was part of the fight. The barn collapsed with a roar, embers raining like sparks from hell. The remaining raiders fell back, retreating into the canyon's shadow, leaving 2 dead behind. Daniel stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, soot streaking his skin. The night stank of smoke and blood. Iona touched his arm, her face pale, her voice steady despite the chaos. "They'll come again. With more." He knew she was right. And he knew Mercer wouldn't be satisfied until he had broken them completely. The attack stirred something Daniel had buried long ago. As he buried the dead raiders outside the fence line, flashes of his past burned through him. The duel in Abilene, the young man he'd killed for pride, the faces of those who had cursed his name as he rode away. Violence had once been his livelihood. Now it threatened to become his curse again. Each trigger pull during the raid had felt too easy, too natural. And yet, for the first time, he told himself the blood had purpose. He hadn't killed for pride. He'd killed to protect her. The next day, Mercer himself rode up with 6 men at his back. They didn't attack, they jeered. He sat tall in the saddle, his face hardened into cruel lines, but his eyes lit with recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. Hayes the gunslinger. Thought you were dead or drunk in some ditch. And here you are playin' house with the chief's cripple." Laughter tore from his men, ugly and sharp. Daniel stood still, the rifle resting easy in his grip. "Leave," he said. Just one word, cold and flat. Mercer smirked. "Not without what I came for. This land. Or her." His eyes slid toward the porch where Iona stood, her pale eyes unblinking, her hand gripping the post as if it tethered her to the earth. "She'll fetch a price," he added. The air seemed to crackle with violence, But Mercer wasn't reckless enough to draw. Not yet. He tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode off with a promise. Next time, Hayes, I'll be collectin'. Daniel knew waiting would be suicide. That night, when Ayanna tried to speak of rebuilding the barn, he shook his head. There'll be no barn if we don't end this. His voice was grim. She didn't argue. Instead, she touched his hand, her grip firmer than he expected. Then do not fight as if you're alone. Mercer struck sooner than expected. They came at dawn, catching Daniel half awake. Ayanna shook him, urgent, her ears sharper than his tired body. Gunfire cracked before he even reached the door. The gang swarmed like wolves, and in the chaos, Ayanna was dragged from the porch, a hand clamped over her mouth as she fought wildly. Daniel fired, dropping one man, then another, but they pulled her onto a horse and vanished into the canyon's shadow before he could reach them. Her cry echoed through the cliffs, torn from him as quickly as breath. The ranch fell into silence once they were gone, save for the groan of settling wood and the thump of Daniel's heart. He stood alone amid the smoke and ruin, his rifle heavy in his hands. Ayanna was gone, stolen like spoils of war. His enemy had her, and with her, every shred of peace he had carved from the desert. For a moment he closed his eyes, seeing only the ghosts of his past, the blood he had once spilled for nothing. Now the stakes were different. Now every mile between him and her was a knife at his throat. When he opened his eyes, the hesitation was gone. He saddled his horse with mechanical precision, loaded his rifle, strapped on the revolver he had sworn never to carry again. The desert stretched before him, vast and merciless, but he rode into it with fire in his chest. The hunt had begun, and this time Daniel Hayes would not ride away haunted. He would ride until she was safe, or until the desert swallowed him whole. The canyon walls rose like jagged teeth, shadows pooling in their cracks as the sun bled down the sky. Daniel rode hard, his horse lathered with sweat, every hoofbeat carrying the rhythm of his desperation. Tracks in the dust told him Mercer's gang had gone to ground here, in the labyrinth of stone where ambushes bred like snakes. He knew the danger, knew the odds, but none of it mattered. Ayanna's cry still echoed in his skull, sharper than gunfire, sharper than guilt. He would not lose her, not to Mercer, not to fate, not to the cruel desert that had already taken too much. The canyon narrowed, forcing him to dismount. He tied the horse in a shaded alcove, whispered a word of thanks, then moved forward with rifle in hand. Every sense sharpened. The smell of ash from their campfires. The murmur of men laughing too loudly. The clink of metal against rock. Daniel crouched, his breath steadying. His mind falling into the old rhythm he hated and feared, the killer's calm. He saw her first, bound against a rock near the firelight, her dark hair tangled, her lips cracked from thirst. Ayanna sat upright, not broken, not pleading, but silent, her chin lifted as though daring the world to look away. Even in chains, she carried herself like someone unbowed. Daniel's chest tightened with something deeper than rage. Mercer appeared, striding out of the fire's glow with the swagger of a man who believed himself untouchable. His voice carried, sharp as a whip. "I knew you'd come, Hayes. A man like you can't bury what he is. You're a killer, always were, always will be." Daniel stepped into the open, rifle raised. "Let her go." Mercer laughed. "Or what? You'll kill us all. Maybe you should. It'd make you honest again." His men shifted, hands hovering over their guns, eager for blood. The silence broke with a gunshot. Daniel fired first, the bullet taking a man in the chest before his pistol cleared leather. Chaos erupted. Sparks flew as shots ricocheted off stone, the air filling with thunder. Daniel moved like a storm, each breath a shot, each step a decision. He felt no pride, no thrill, only necessity. The ghosts of his past pressed close, whispering, but he pushed them aside. This was not about vengeance. This was about her. Mercer ducked behind a boulder, barking orders. Two of his men rushed Daniel, blades flashing. The fight turned brutal, close, vicious. Daniel's rifle but cracked a skull. His knife found another belly. Blood slicked his hands, and for a moment he almost lost himself in it, the old hunger stirring. But then he heard her voice, faint but clear. Daniel! Just his name. Nothing more. But it pulled him back from the edge. He surged forward, cutting through the last of the raiders until only Mercer remained. The outlaw's grin had faltered, sweat glistening on his brow, yet arrogance still curled his lip. You think she makes you better? Mercer spat. She makes you weak. Men like us don't get redemption. Daniel's revolver was steady, his aim sure. Maybe not. But I'll take love over nothing. The final shot echoed through the canyon, rolling like thunder until it faded into silence. Mercer fell, his smirk gone, his life bleeding into the dirt. Daniel didn't watch him die. He turned to Iona, cutting her bonds with hands that trembled more from fear than battle. She reached for him the moment she was free, her touch soft against his bloodied skin. I knew you'd come, she whispered. I nearly didn't, he admitted, voice ragged. But I couldn't leave you in the dark. They rode back under the weight of stars, the desert hushed as if honoring what had passed. When they reached the edge of the Apache camp, silence swept over the people. They saw Iona alive, walking with Daniel's hand steady at her elbow. Whispers rippled through them, not of curses, not of shame, but of something stronger. Chief Tall Hawk stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he measured the daughter he had cast aside. You stand taller now, he said quietly. Even without sight. Iona lifted her chin. I was never less. You simply chose not to see. The chief's gaze flicked to Daniel, unreadable. For the first time he gave a nod. Not approval, not warmth, but acknowledgement. The man he had mocked had returned his daughter whole. Pride, bitter and reluctant, glimmered in his stare. Then he turned away, leaving them to the murmurs of the tribe. Daniel and Iona rebuilt in the weeks that followed. The barn rose again from ashes, stronger than before. Neighbors who once mocked them now tipped hats and offered hands. The land itself seemed to soften, grass greening after long drought, as if the desert had accepted their vow. Yet Daniel knew peace was never permanent. Outlaws would come. Hard years would return. But something inside him had shifted. He was no longer a man running from ghosts. He was a man standing with someone worth facing them for. One night, beneath the sweep of stars, they sat together on the porch. The air was cool, the scent of mesquite drifting on the breeze. Iona leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. She smiled faintly, a smile that reached her clouded eyes. The cowboy who married a broken woman, she said with quiet humor. Daniel's arm wrapped around her, his voice low and certain. No, the woman who made me whole. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of trust, of survival, of promises unspoken but deeply understood. The desert stretched wide before them, vast and unforgiving, but Daniel Hayes no longer feared it. He had given his name, and in return, he had been given more than redemption. He had been given purpose. The narrator's voice lingers, soft as the night wind. In a land of dust and blood, love was the sharpest weapon. Daniel Hayes turned mockery into vow, shame into pride, and in doing so, carved his own legend into the unforgiving West. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.